Well, I'm in the undercoating shed. I've just given these guys a spray. It's time to get them to the painting table. Painting and talking. Hi. So what I'm going to do here is a bit of a designer's diary, whilst also painting up some of the minis that I'm going to use for Dauntless. I've talked about Dauntless a few times on the channel, and people seem interested in it. So I'm going to paint some of the minis that I'm going to use as explorers, whilst hopefully explaining, at least in this first designer diary, some of the inspiration and genesis of the game. First of all, I'm going to talk about my plan for the painting job. What I've done here is I've taken a set of minis that are a sort of Mansions of Madness, Mountains of Madness explorers group, sort of Arctic explorers. I've given them a sort of primer coat of a dark grey and a sort of top zenithal rattle can of white, and I'm going for a bit of an effect look. So what I've done is give them an undershot sort of past rattle can of light pink and pale blue. This is because the idea I'm trying to get here, or sort of the effect I'm trying to recreate, is in the Arctic, where the light gets weaker, as it bounces back up off of the snow, you get these sort of split shadows of a sort of a light pink and a pale blue. Now, obviously, in reality, it's a lot less exaggerated than the way I've done it here, but exaggerating these sort of effects, I think, in minis painting is sort of the way to go. So I'm going to try and give them this sort of underlit coloured shadow effect as I paint them. I'm going for a very limited palette here, sort of pale yellows and browns for the leather and wood on the minis, light grey for the rock and sort of metallics and skin tones, and that's about all I want to do for colour, and white for the sort of the clothes and parkas and whatnot. So trying to give it a pale, sort of quite washed out look from the painting, with the sort of effects bringing a bit of a pop in. So I'll get on with starting the painting, putting down some of these base coats as I start to talk about the game. So initially, the very sort of first version of Dauntless, which was quite a while ago now, was actually a sort of post-apocalyptic sort of zombie game without the zombies. So what I found a little bit underwhelming about a lot of zombies games and campaign games that I wanted to address or look at with the game is, well, I suppose there are two things that I wanted to sort of to look at with the game. The first thing is the way that often in campaign games generally, when you have a leader of a force, they are simply a model with a leader's profile. They simply are automatically the leader. You choose them as the leader, and they never sort of stop having that role, that capacity, that capability. which isn't the way that it happens sort of either in life, or in most of the dramatic representations of desperate post-apocalyptic narratives that I've seen. So the game that partly inspired the initial thinking, and this is in no way a reflection on that game itself. It's it's a lovely system. It's very effective, and as I say, these are the sorts of the things that are within most games, campaign games like this. But it was initially Last Days, the sort of zombie apocalypse Miz game from Osprey Games. And like I say, in that game, you simply you pick a leader type. They are the leader type, and that never goes away. If they die, you replace them with a new leader, who is automatically a leader because they inherently have that quality. And I wanted, a group where leadership was more sort of shifting, more dependent upon the individuals, the way the individuals acted, and the way that other people had good reason to respond to them. Part of the reason, as I say, that I wanted that is from the sorts of things, as I say, happen in narratives, movies, sort of films, stories, serials that I've watched, and particularly a large part of the inspiration for that was the TV show of The Walking Dead. So in that, relationships are built and broken down over the series by what happens during sort of foraging trips, things like that, times when people go out looking for supplies. If somebody goes and saves somebody during an encounter, if somebody is hurt during an encounter, then relationships are built, sort of forged in fire, and people blame each other when a character's brother or lover goes out on a trip to find supplies and get hurt or killed. The character who cares about that individual blames the person who was supposed to be leading the raid, the foraging trip, whatever it happens to be. And I really wanted a game that could bring that in and represent that in within the rules. So at first, as I say, it was a sort of zombies game without zombies. That very first iteration was a thing called ELE, for Extinction Level Event. And the idea was that there was a terrible virus that killed people and was sort of lingering in the environment. You were mostly having to go out and recover supplies in this zone that had areas that were more or less sort of filled with the virus in question. And that was because I wanted it to be very soloable. I didn't necessarily want people to have to actually deal with AI-driven zombies. AI can be a bit of a hassle, and frankly, there are a lot of really good zombie-based post-apocalyptic survival skirmish campaign games. I didn't particularly see a reason, or I wasn't particularly inspired to retread over that specific ground. But I wanted something that was very much sort of a threat within the environment, that any time you searched something for supplies, went into a new area, you had to worry about what the level of exposure to the virus was going to be. And in that early version, the sort of ultimate conclusion of a campaign was getting to a point where you had completely uninfected people, and the means within your compound to keep them safe and isolated from the disease. Again, it had this sort of Walking Dead idea that everybody was infected, that there was an inevitable movement of infection within all of your crew, that everybody was eventually getting worse and worse and more badly infected and would essentially die, and that you were trying to save the world, sort of restart the human population by getting together a group of completely uninfected individuals and saving them. So the first sort of big, I think, jump in the evolution of the game was I went to Osprey with ELE and pitched it to them. Now, at that stage, they were frankly pretty quick to turn it down. I think that's partly because I say they were quick to turn it down. If you've sort of ever sent anything in, pitched it to Osprey, they're not particularly quick on their turnaround for open submissions. But having spoken to Mike, that doesn't change once you are a sort of known author working with them or anything. But relatively speaking, after a sort of a bit of back and forth and me chasing them up to get any kind of response, they weren't interested in that iteration of the game at that point. So it came back from them, and I started sort of looking at the game and thinking about it, and around that sort of time, one of what has become the sort of the biggest inspirations for the game, AMC's The Terror, the first season of that, came on. And so, for those who aren't familiar, that's a show about a sort of a ship exploring the Arctic region and getting getting caught in the pack ice for longer than they would want, and getting attacked by a sort of a creature which takes the form mostly of a polar bear, but is a sort of Native American sort of curse for the wrongs that they've done during their exploration, alongside the sort of the attacks of this supernatural creature. They have to deal with various groups on the ship sort of breaking up and rebelling against each other, weak leadership, the ship breaking down, supplies running low, etc., etc. And that show particularly, but a lot of those sort of Arctic disaster tropes really struck me. Around the same time, I was playing a video game called Help Will Come Tomorrow, wherein the player is sort of trying to get a group of survivors of a train derailment during the Russian Revolution to survive long enough to, well, for help to come, or for them to make their own way out of the wilderness. And they're dealing with roving bands of revolutionaries and raiders, wild animals, but primarily the cold and starvation. And there's a few games I enjoyed sort of based on the same ideas. So Dead in Bermuda is another one that I played and I really liked. And so I went back and redesigned the game to be about a sort of to be primarily about the sort of Arctic expedition with sort of strange forces attacking the explorers and then them having to deal with that. So after a significant redesign, I eventually went back to Osprey with the game, and this time around they were much keener, and we actually went through several back and forths and conversations on it, and their input was that what they wanted was for the game to be more, I guess, modular. So they wanted, an option where you could be a group of explorers. Actually, to be fair, I pitched it to them as being like you could either be a set of explorers sort of caught in a jungle environment, or in an Arctic environment, and they wanted it to be much more modular. So rather than just being Arctic explorers or explorers in a jungle, you could be prehistoric cavemen trying to survive as a tribe, or people caught in a desert, like Sahara or something of that nature, so that you can have like a much more modular approach to both who the survivors were, what the environment they were dealing with, and what threats they were coming across. So I redesigned the game to have way more sort of options in environments, and I was sort of stuck on that kind of idea for quite a while. After Osprey finally passed on the game, which took quite a little while, I went back to the idea of it being eventually, and this is after a few iterations, I went back to the idea of it being either a sort of a jungle environment, or an Arctic environment, and I think that was largely because of the game I mentioned before, Dead in Bermuda, is set in a jungle environment, and I did like the idea. Partly, I think, because of there are a handful of Lovecraft sort of stories dealing with the serpents of Yig, or whatever they happen to be. Partly because of that whole sort of romancing the stone, Crocodile Dundee kind of, surviving in a fecund environment thing. There seemed to be a lot of mileage in that. The next sort of major moment for the design sort of era turnaround in it is in the Discord. One of our members offered to do some artwork, or at least shortly after the One Box War Game Challenge, where a lot of people had shown off some incredible artistic skills working on their games. They'd asked, whether people wanted some pieces, sort of, I think they were looking to stretch their muscles with some drawing. And if there's one thing that I am always more than happy to accept, it's some extra artwork. I'm no kind of an artist myself. Part of the reason I'm going for a sort of set of effects on these models with the underlighting and whatnot is that I'm not a great minis painter, and I find that something a bit more unusual, like a series of effects, distracts a little bit from my average painting skills. And for me, I often really struggle with motivation on a project if there isn't sort of feedback, responses, another person who's interested in what is happening in the document, sort of engaging with it. So just having that sort of that feedback of somebody doing artwork for the game made it seem live to me again. And I'm hugely thankful for that, because it's been this recent period of coming back to the game that's got me really excited about it. The artwork, so the game, when the artwork started being done, was still in this mixed state of being either jungle or Arctic, and has a lot of emphasis on the idea that there could be a monster out there, hunting, chasing you, that you have to deal with. Now, much possibly to my own chagrin, I really realised recently that the jungle, having the jungle aspect to the game, is detracting from it. It's making it more diluted. I think making it harder to understand and put together and get started with, and it's forcing a lot of the pieces to be sort of generic and shapeable to sort of different settings and different environments. And I say to my chagrin, because artwork has been done of those other pieces, and I absolutely hate, inverted commas, wasting somebody's time. Now, nothing's wasted, because as much of any of it's going to get used, it's all going to get used at some point. And I think at this stage, my thinking of what I want to do with the game is kind of have it like seasons, not as in of the year, but like of a TV show. Part of the inspiration for the game anyway, as they say, is AMC's The Terror, and AMC's The Terror is an anthology horror series. So the first season is these Arctic explorers. The second season is set in a Japanese internment camp during the Second World War, and horror anthology series with things like American Horror Story, stuff of that nature, does sort of seem to be the way of presenting those kinds of shows at the moment. And so what I think will be the situation with Dauntless at this point is that there'll be Dauntless Season 1, which will be set in the Arctic, and then at some point there'll be a Dauntless Season 2, which will be set in the jungle and the forests, and an idea of the sort of the Appalachian Mountains in America, something like that, and then eventually the desert, depending on how far I can take it and what the response ends up being. And by virtue of that, I believe that I'll be able to focus much more in on the nature of the threats, the nature of the environment, and I can be a bit more specific and give more space to the extra, the supernatural threats, whatever they happen to be. Because at the moment, again, it's trying to cover every possible trope. So there's one of the threats that's representing a sort of a zombie outbreak, which really doesn't make any sense for an Arctic or a jungle setting, frankly, which are the two main settings. And that's a bit of a hangover from the fact that Walking Dead is a major inspiration for the game. You know, the horde zombie apocalypses are a major standard threat in shows, movies, etc. Of this kind. But they don't make much sense for the settings that I've got, and so having the opportunity to reconsider and focus in a little bit, and at some point, you know, there can be a post-apocalyptic season which has a more effective urban environment, and we can go and do zombies and do them properly and have that be a real part of the setting. And I think I'd like to have a go at that. I Am Legend, you know, Amiga Man version of things, I think would be really cool. But as always, it's sort of, you know, you need to go in there and actually do it and do it properly, rather than sort of half-arsing a version of it. So at the moment, the main place the overall design is in. Just a minute, I want to make that more of a thinner coat and a bit of a dry brush, and actually leave some of the pink and blue in, rather than completely losing it to the grey. I like the pink and blue effect. I'm not sure how good of a job I'm currently making in leaving it there, and that can be a tricky thing about this sort of painting effects. Is it's hard to know until you get a bit of a way along how much you want to leave in and present on the Mini. I mean, I've got pink and blue paints, so I can always go back in, and it might just be that the rattle can layer is there to sort of give a bit of guidance. So yeah, at the moment the design is at a place where I want to go back in and refocus it in the environment, the world that it's set in. You know, go back and make it more distinctly of the Arctic, which is, I always think it's quite an inspiring moment when you know that you really want to go back and totally rewrite something. The moments when you're pretty sure that what you've got is wrong are, for me, see, this is, I've jumped into doing the sort of the non-metallic metal on the pick without really having thought very hard about how the blue and white's going to affect that, because obviously that would be the place where those reflections would be the strongest. So I'm going to leave that for now. Like I say, I think I will have to eventually go back in with the blue and white at the end and get more of that effect on it, but I'm going to leave it under there. Yeah, so I often find the moments when you realise you are completely wrong on a design the most inspiring, because those are often the moments where the signposts are often strongest when you know, you're furthest away from where you should be, because at that point almost any direction is an improvement. It's oftentimes when you get sort of closer to the road where adjustments have to be more subtle and careful, that you can actually go wrong. So I want to go back in and have a quite major rewrite. I'm looking forward to. For the moment, I've got a few more pressing projects that I'm working on. Is that just a bit of dust? A few more pressing projects that I'm working on for various reasons. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the sort of the central mechanics of the game, the bits that have been there from the start and will be there in sort of whatever season it ends up being. So most central to the game, as I said, I want it to be this thing where the actual relationships built up amongst your faction really matter and really build depending upon what they do in the environment. And this is based on a sort of a relationship grid. So I'll stick up a picture of the current iteration of it. The idea of this is that each member of your group has a number of connections to everybody else. You go on a scavenging mission with somebody, and it goes well. You're going to pick up further connections with them. You're going to get that sort of bound in blood thing going on with them, and that's one of the things I remember very distinctly from one of the later series of The Walking Dead, where Rick and Daryl are fighting because they've sort of fallen out, and it's this heartbreaking moment because of the things they've been through together, the things they've done, what they've seen, what they've gone through. Not because you're told that they have this particular relationship, because you've been there with them through it. You've built it up, you've created it, you know, in your mind as you've seen it play out on the screen. And that's ultimately what is the heart of what I want Dauntless to be. And so the way this works is if you go out with somebody, as I say, and things go well, you build up connections. If things go badly, if someone dies, then anybody with a connection to the person who died loses a connection from the leader of that particular raid, that particular search for supplies. So the tabletop element of the game is playing through and representing those journeys out for supplies, for food, for fur, for wood, for things to build up the camp and survive. And during those raids, you're going to encounter dangerous wild animals, I don't know if I want to go with the pinker flesh tone. I think I'm going to go straight to the paler one and highlight up from that, because this is just base coating. You're going to encounter dangerous animals. People might die. If somebody does die, the people who love that person blames the one that they count responsible. The individual, this guy's got literally no skin showing. The individual who was leading the raid. If my brother goes out looking for supplies and dies, and he looks like he's not wearing gloves, but I want to give him bare hands, but it feels insane that anybody in this environment wouldn't be wearing gloves. So I'm going to give him gloves. You know, if my brother goes out on a raid and dies, I'm going to blame you for his death, and I'm going to lose connections and relationships with you. And the leader of the group is the person with the most connections to other people. The relationships actually build and change depending on who you take on raids. I'm going to have to decide what colour his hair is going to be, and how you perform. That's actually based on research. Sounds a bit highfalutin, but a book an audio book I listened to about the Scott expedition, where essentially the best skier on the Scott expedition was also a charismatic leader, and Scott, on several of the scouting expeditions where he would have been a major asset to the team, and in the final expedition, the ill-fated expedition to the pole, Scott actually left him behind because he was paranoid about his charisma leading to him sort of taking the affections of the other men and sort of becoming a de facto leader of the expedition. So that's something that you sort of will have to deal with to a degree, where you want to obviously take the best people on an expedition, but over time, if you overly rely on some people, they're going to eventually sort of usurp the leadership position. And whilst you can sort of switch leader in the group, doing so is extremely sort of problematic and disruptive, and affects morale and such like. So you have to make decisions about who to take on a given scouting expedition, sort of based on the internal politics of your group, of your team. So one of the other sort of major principles of the game is that all of the campaign sort of camp management and such like bits are completely chanceless, and it's only the actual foraging runs, the expeditions into the wilds, that you require you to roll any dice or do anything that relies on luck and things being, as it were, checked. And the reason for that is, what I find with a lot of campaign systems is that since they're essentially additions to what is primarily a tabletop game, you get together with your friends, play through a tabletop encounter, and then the campaign bit gets sort of rushed at the end of the session, at the end of the whatever it ends up being, sort of club game or meeting at someone's house or whatnot. And what I want is for the campaign system to not be the whole game by any stretch of the imagination, but I do want it to be more sort of considered, a more sort of significant part of your thinking, of your planning, of what you're sort of trying to do and achieve. And I think the way to do that is to say, okay, well, because these bits are entirely chanceless, you can have your sort of your pickup game, your club game, wherever it happens to be, that involves sort of physically playing on the tabletop. Then you can go home with the things that everybody has seen and witnessed and that needed to be witnessed because they were down to dice rolls, and dice rolls sort of keep us honest. But then you can go home and you can do the planning bit, the in-between bit, the camp management, the campaign bits, the resolution of the things between your team members, completely sort of on your own and away from the other people. And there's no need to worry about, what did he roll, what happened, because there are no rolls. There's no sort of fear of sort of dishonesty in that part, and so you have a sort of semi-solo element at the end of sort of in between each session, which gives you sort of all the time in the world to make those important decisions, to manage your team, to do whatever you need to do to keep your camp running. And I think by virtue of that, you can have a much more involved campaign system, and have sort of decisions be much more impactful. So you can go away, make your in-between session choices, and then sort of come back to the next session and simply report what decisions you made. And there's no worries about people sort of having to check your rolls or whatever it happens to be, because there were no rolls made in that part of the game system. So yeah, the main thing I'm sort of wanting to look at, particularly in this next iteration of the game, is to sort of up the necessary interaction side of things. So I want the game to be soloable. There's a few reasons for that. The first is simply because it absolutely just can be. There's absolutely no reason why it can't be a soloable game, because fundamentally the environmental threats are there, and they're an inherent part of the game. It's going to be PvPvE, sort of no matter what the iteration is. And as soon as you have that PvPvE setup, you're always going to have the option to make it soloable. And if you have that option, I think you're crazy not to take it. Secondly, I think that any campaign-heavy game benefits from a soloable option. I think that sort of campaign play, that sort of building of your characters, your camp, your units and such like, I think really benefits from the opportunity to say take some time, really consider your options, what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve. Also, I think that like the nature of PvPvE, and because this game is always going to be heavily about you fighting the environment far more than it's going to be about you fighting the other people trying to survive in that environment. Because the game's always going to have that sort of heavy PvPvE element to it, it's going to be to some degree, that you are first and foremost fighting something other than the other players. So it's going to be, to some degree, it's going to feel a little bit like a solo game, just where other people are in the same sandpit, no matter what. And I think the thing to do is to sort of lean into that effect. But still, I do not want it to be multiplayer solo. These are games we play because we enjoy a level of interaction between players, between human beings. And I think, that interaction between players is the thing that always excites me about them. So I want to bring that forefront and make that a necessary sort of part of the game. And at the moment in the design, what I'm trying to do is sort of work out how to achieve that while still keeping the solo mode still sort of being able to shine. I don't want the solo mode to feel like, well, it's the version you play because you can't get other people around to play the game. I want it to feel like, this is still a sort of premium form of the game. Currently, the main place that player interaction sort of revolves around is battling against sort of creatures. Basically, at the moment, if you want to take down like a polar bear and therefore gain the sort of significant resources that provides, you're going to need 2 teams of people at least to take them down. So the result of that is that basically in solo mode, something like a polar bear is a near insurmountable threat. You avoid the thing. If you come across it, the likelihood of you ever taking one down with a single team, and the likelihood of it ever being a sensible idea, given the resource cost and the risk that it involves, is close to nil. Which is something I don't think that's a sort of a problem for the game. I'm a little concerned that might not be immediately obvious to people, and they'll have some very sort of negative experiences when they sort of try and rush a polar bear on their first game. But I think that's what they call a player floor experience rather than something that will be perceived as a game floor experience, and also the sort of player floor experience that, in hindsight makes absolute perfect sense to players. And that's the kind of floor that is a positive. So, like, just in game design terms, when players fail to achieve something in a game, that is something we could technically define as a flaw. Something is flawed in, what the player did. Now, that can either be a flaw in the game or a flaw in the player. As in, I'm playing a game, I press a certain button, like say it's a digital game, the input doesn't register, it wasn't my fault, I did exactly the right thing. It just didn't do what it was meant to in that moment. That's a game flaw. That's the sort of thing where, I might not play that game again. Certainly if that effect occurs on a regular or semi-regular basis, I'm going to find that very off-putting. A player flaw is I make a bad decision, I make a bad choice, and so I fail because of that. That's the sort of thing where, broadly speaking, that's a positive. Actually, that's a place where I believe I can learn the game, I can achieve mastery. So that's a good thing. So I do think, like, a bunch of sort of polar explorers without guns and things of that nature attempting to take down a polar bear and getting absolutely mauled, I think is the sort of thing that will be perceived, after it goes badly, as an acceptable player flaw. The player will say, well, to be fair, in many ways, if I had managed to take down the polar bear, that would have been almost, disappointing. I probably shouldn't be able to achieve such a thing. So the fact that it's like potentially a different experience of the sort of flora and fauna for multiplayer as opposed to solo play, I don't think is inherently a negative, of solo play. I don't think that reduces the experience. I think that changes it, which is totally fine. And I think that people will be like, it's interesting sort of playing it solo because that you're almost certainly never going to have the resources to take down some of these animals, and you have to react to seeing them in a very specific way, and it sort of shapes your play at the tabletop. So that's a part that I'm sort of broadly happy with the idea of. And it's not like if you go multiplayer, you're going to be able to take down polar bears on the regular. It's going to require some what you call end game teams, and it's going to require some negotiation and coordination that is far from certain, because the polar bear gets taken down, but not everybody can walk off with its resources, and so negotiating with the other player to how that's going to work is going to be at least as big a task as actually taking the bear down, which is something I'm happy with. I think that'll work quite well. But other than around the large sort of threat animals, there's not a lot of opportunity for player interaction at the moment. Combat between players is basically, in the system at the moment, such a bad idea. It's an extremely high resource cost thing to attempt with very little sort of certainty in the outcome. Pretty much no matter what you're using and how you're doing, going about it, even if the what should be the odds are fairly heavily in your favour, it's quite a poor idea, and that's very much intentional. I don't want this to be, a combat skirmish game set in the Arctic. And at the moment, that's a decision that I am struggling to find the right spot for. I don't want it to just be a case of you turn up, you see the other guy, and you just, on every level, don't even consider going anywhere near him, interacting with him, having anything to do with him. Part of where I think that this might be resolved is in relation to prey animals. So the animals in the game intentionally work in a fairly, but not entirely, sort of predictable manner. And particularly the prey animals are, unsurprisingly, much, much, much faster than your human explorers. And realistically, until you've got some sort of fairly developed bits and pieces, the only way you're going to sort of take down one of these quite valuable, resources for like food and fur and bits like that is to coordinate yourself. You would essentially need to have somebody play beater, chase the rabbit out, and have somebody else waiting to sort of to grab it as it bolts. And even then it wouldn't be sort of certain, but that's that's your realistic likely option. If you just run at the rabbit, it's easily going to sort of get away from you. And part of what I'm hoping is that by having sort of clear resource opportunities and having prey animals, so that your opponent's movement is relatively predictable, the prey animal's reaction is going to be largely predictable. One of the ways in which you're going to sort of interact with the other players is sort of by proxy, judging where they're going to move, judging how things like Arctic rabbits are going to react to that movement, and using that to capture the rabbits. So essentially my hope at the moment is that other players interact with you in a sort of tertiary fashion. They're an element within the environment that you have to react to, rather than something that you are going to actively sort of run up and fight with immediately. And again, this is one of these things where this has to be something that is going to have to be made quite sort of sharply clear within the presentation of the game. The level of sort of lethality of encounters, I'm going to say sort of long-term pain that doing those sorts of things are going to result in, but it's going to be, frankly, pretty immediate and short-term. I mean, pretty immediate, short-term, and long-term. if you willfully enter into combat at points like that. Yeah, I think that's the way to go to get the reflective effect. I'm gonna leave that with the blue and the pink, and we'll add some white in because it makes some sort of nice spot color moments. Yeah, but I'm thinking, I don't know. At the moment, I'm not sure how much heavier I want that interaction to be. I know that I want to up the level of environmental threat and make it more distinctive and more distinct. At the moment, as I say, because I think that, you know, I went through what was ultimately a reasonable and hopefully valuable for the future sort of dead end in working through the sort of the idea of the desert and the jungle options. I think the Arctic lost a bit of its character and characteristics. So at the moment, I want to go back in and put that flavour back in. I want to focus on the interactivity, the relationship between players, and hopefully come up with an iteration that sort of pumps those things up a little bit, and then I'll come back and explain how I think that's all going. Okay, so painting wise, I think so far I like the sort of the subtle sort of blue and pink shadowing effects. I like that it's sort of the washed out colours. I think that's right. Obviously, this is just this is a base coat layer. I'm just sort of trying to get down some markers, as it were. We'll come back in. I'm loath to do anything in the way of sort of washes or shading. I might go with a very light glaze of some kind, or a spot wash or a spot glaze. That'll probably be the next session. So okay, I'm going to go away. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy generally with the effect. I think that sort of, yeah, that's the sort of idea I want to go for with them. I think it's going to come through. I think we're gonna get there. I think it has a slightly sort of otherworldly, ethereally kind of feel to it. But we'll do that through stages. So as I say, if in the event that you're interested in recreating something like this is a grey primer with zenithal white rattle can, and then afterwards a sort of sweep past of a blue rattle can and a pink rattle can at angles to give a sort of slightly underlit angled effect, like I say, to try and recreate these slightly odd lighting effects you get in the Arctic, where light weakens and breaks up and comes up off of the snow almost as heavily as it sort of does down from above, but that light that comes off the snow is so weak that it's sort of broken and split, and so you do get these sort of coloured shadows in those sort of extreme environments. And then, as I've just gone for a first layer of base coat, fairly sort of washed out sepias for the actual colours. Come back in and start putting some highlights and washes in the next stage. So yeah, that's my thinking of where Dauntless is at the moment. I'm going to put a link down in the show notes to the current work in progress document. As I say, at the moment it's at a stage where it's totally viable, it's totally playable, but the flavour that I want isn't quite there, and the environment, the nature of it isn't isn't quite in place, and I'm going to be going through, hopefully, in the following weeks and months, sort of turning that round. Not immediately, because UKGE is coming up in the next week or two, but I might sort of get in and sort of start dropping some flavour in there at the very least. If you do check out the document, please leave some feedback and give some comments in it. That's hugely valuable to me. This is a work in progress, and I'd love to know what people's opinions are, what they think should be dialed up or dialed down. Obviously, if you have opinions, drop them in the comments. I know a few people commented on a previous video they were interested in the idea of Dauntless, which is part of why I'm filming this designer's diary. And also, I'm not sort of super sort of confident in the idea of doing designer's diaries. It's not something I've been strong at in the past, so I'd love to know what sorts of things people would like to hear in relation to my thinking of design. If there are specific parts or projects that you'd like me to talk through. I'd like to sort of start making these a semi-regular thing that I film. For now, I'm going to sign off on this designer's diary. I don't exactly when I'll put it up, both in relation to from now and in relation to the week, but I know that this Saturday there'll be a game design chat with myself and Mike Hutchinson coming up on the channel. I know there'll be links across to our Patreons if you want to support us on the channel and what we're doing. That's a great way to do it. As I say, I'll try and put a link through to Dauntless, and I'll put links in the descriptions through to places where you can check out and pick up mine and Mike's games. And as always, a like and subscribe really helps out the channel. It's a small click, but it means a lot. But for now, from this designer's diary, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thanks and goodbye. Bye-bye.